The bustling streets of Austin fell silent as Joe Rogan stood transfixed, his morning coffee forgotten in his hand. Through the window of his favorite local cafe, he watched a scene that would change not just his day, but the lives of countless others. A young girl, no more than 16, was sharing her lunch with a homeless man outside the city library. But it wasn't just the act of sharing. It was the way she sat down next to him on the cold concrete, pulled out her carefully packed sandwich, and split it in half with the same care you'd show a dear friend. "Jamie, are you seeing this?" Joe whispered to his producer, who was checking emails on his phone. Jamie looked up, following Joe's gaze to the touching scene unfolding across the street. The girl, dressed in a simple hoodie and worn jeans, was now pulling out a small notebook, and through the morning haze, Joe could see her helping the man write something down. Their heads were bent together in concentration, an unlikely pair united in some shared purpose that seemed to transcend their vastly different circumstances. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories about everyday heroes and acts of kindness that change lives, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. What happened next would spark a movement that nobody saw coming, least of all Joe Rogan himself. But to understand the full impact of that morning, we need to go back 3 months earlier, when Maria Rodriguez, the 16-year-old daughter of a local restaurant worker, first met Thomas Wheeler, a former English professor who'd lost everything to medical debt. It had started as any other morning for Maria. She was heading to her part-time job at the library, a position she'd taken to help her single mother with the bills. The morning shift meant she could work before school, reshelving books and helping to open the building for the day. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. When she first noticed Thomas, cuddled in the doorway, clutching a weathered copy of The Great Gatsby. "You know," he had said, catching her curious glance. "Fitzgerald wrote this while he was nearly broke himself." His voice carried the unmistakable polish of decades in academia, a striking contrast to his worn appearance. Despite the hardships evident in his weathered face and threadbare coat, his eyes still held a spark of intellectual vitality that caught Maria's attention. Maria, instead of hurrying past like most people did, had stopped. Something about the way he cradled the book, like it was both a shield and a treasure, made her pause. "Really? We're studying it in English class right now. I'm having trouble with some of the symbolism." That first conversation turned into a daily ritual. Thomas would help Maria with her English homework, and she would bring him a portion of her lunch, her mother's homemade empanadas, carefully wrapped in foil. But more than food, she brought him dignity, sitting with him like a student with a respected teacher. Their conversations ranged from literature to life, with Thomas sharing insights that went far beyond classroom analysis. "To green light," he'd explained one morning, his voice taking on the familiar cadence of a lecturer, "isn't just about Gatsby's love for Daisy. It's about the American dream itself, always gleaming in the distance, promising everything while remaining just out of reach." His words carried a weight that spoke of personal experience, though Maria wouldn't understand the full meaning until later. What Maria didn't know then was that Thomas had once been a celebrated professor at UT Austin, his lectures drawing students from across disciplines. His classes weren't just about literature. They were about understanding the human condition through the lens of great writing. Students would line up after class to continue discussions, and his office hours often extended well into the evening. But a devastating cancer diagnosis, coupled with insurance complications, had stripped him of everything: his savings, his home, and eventually his position. The medical bills had kept mounting until the ground beneath his feet simply crumbled away. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. Like so many characters in the books he taught, he had watched his own American dream dissolve into something unrecognizable. Maria's mother, Isabella Rodriguez, had noticed the changes in her daughter over those months. Maria had always been compassionate, but her interactions with Thomas had deepened her understanding of human dignity. Isabella worked double shifts at her restaurant job, and she recognized in Thomas the same quiet pride she saw in many who had fallen on hard times. "Mama," Maria had said one evening while helping in the kitchen, "can we make extra empanadas tomorrow? My friend, He really likes them. Isabella had smiled, adding more ingredients to the bowl without question. She understood that sometimes food was about more than sustenance. It was about connection, about saying you matter without words. Now, as Joe Rogan watched Maria helping Thomas with what appeared to be a job application, something clicked in his mind. This wasn't just about a sandwich being shared. It was about human connection, about seeing beyond circumstances to the person underneath. The morning light painted the scene in gentle hues, highlighting the quiet dignity of their interaction. Joe pulled out his phone and started recording. The morning light caught Maria's patient smile as she helped Thomas navigate the online application form on her small tablet. This wasn't a staged act of kindness for social media. It was raw, real, and happening right in front of him. The kind of authentic human moment that couldn't be manufactured or scripted. Jamie, Joe said, his voice carrying that intensity his podcast listeners would instantly recognize. We need to talk to them. Jamie nodded, already understanding where this was going. He'd worked with Joe long enough to know when something had captured his genuine interest. As Joe crossed the street, Thomas looked up, recognition flickering across his weathered face. He'd been a regular listener to the Joe Rogan Experience during his teaching days, often incorporating clips into his media literacy classes. The podcast had been a way to connect with his students, showing them how intellectual discourse could be both accessible and engaging. Professor Wheeler? Joe asked, surprising both Thomas and Maria. I remember reading about your lectures on modernist literature a few years back. They were legendary on campus. Joe had done his research. Thomas's lectures had been featured in the university paper multiple times, praised for their ability to make complex literary concepts relatable to modern life. Thomas's eyes widened, a mix of shame and pride crossing his face. Maria looked between them, suddenly understanding that her friend's past held depths she hadn't known. The man she'd been sharing lunches with, who had helped her understand Fitzgerald and Hemingway, had once stood in front of packed lecture halls, inspiring hundreds of students. What unfolded over the next 3 hours became one of the most powerful episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience ever recorded. Right there on the street, Joe set up an impromptu recording session. He listened as Thomas and Maria shared their story, how their unlikely friendship had formed, how they'd helped each other see the world differently, and how sometimes the greatest teachers can be found in the most unexpected places. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on education, healthcare, and the fragility of the systems we take for granted. Thomas spoke about his journey from tenure-track professor to homelessness, his voice steady but emotional as he described the cascade of events that had led him here. Maria shared how their daily conversations had changed her perspective on education and human dignity. But Joe Rogan wasn't content with just telling their story. As Thomas explained the cascade of events that had led to his homelessness, Joe's trademark curiosity kicked in. He began asking detailed questions about the medical billing system, about the gaps in academic insurance coverage, about the thin line between security and catastrophe that so many Americans walk. This is bigger than one story, Joe said during the recording. This is about how we treat our educators, how we handle healthcare, and how we've created a system where someone who's dedicated their life to teaching can end up on the street because they got sick. His words carried the weight of realization. This wasn't just about one professor or one act of kindness, but about fundamental issues in American society. The podcast episode went viral within hours of release, but what Joe did next truly shocked everyone. He announced the creation of the Second Chance Scholars Program, a foundation dedicated to helping educators who've fallen on hard times due to medical debt. He seeded the foundation with $1 million of his own money and challenged his vast network of friends and followers to match it. We're always talking about the importance of education, Joe said during the announcement, but we're not taking care of the educators themselves. It's time to change that. His words struck a chord with listeners across the country, many of whom had their own stories of teachers who had impacted their lives. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, the foundation had raised over $10 million. Tech entrepreneurs, athletes, and fellow podcasters all stepped up. But the most touching donations came from former students. Thousands of people who'd been impacted by teachers like Thomas over the years contributed what they could, many sharing stories of educators who'd changed their lives. Thomas Wheeler became the first recipient of the foundation's help. but not in the way many expected. Rather than simply paying off his medical debt, the foundation worked to reinstate his teaching position. But this time, with a twist, he would lead a new program focused on bringing education to homeless communities, working alongside social workers and healthcare advocates to address the root causes of homelessness. The program, dubbed Street Scholars, combined academic instruction with practical support services. Thomas drew on his own experience to create a curriculum that addressed both educational and life skills needs. His first class was held in the very library where he and Maria had spent so many mornings discussing literature. Maria Rodriguez, the quiet hero whose simple act of kindness had started it all, received a full scholarship to UT Austin, where she plans to study education and social work. Her morning ritual of sharing lunch with Thomas had evolved into a movement, inspiring similar programs across the country. The scholarship wasn't just about academics. It was recognition of the kind of emotional intelligence and compassion that true education requires. Joe Rogan's podcast began featuring regular updates on the Second Chance Scholars Program, highlighting stories of educators who'd fallen through society's cracks and the communities coming together to help them. But more importantly, these episodes sparked crucial conversations about the intersections of education, healthcare, and human dignity. The story could have ended there, with Thomas back on his feet and Maria headed to college, but its impact continued to ripple outward. Other podcast hosts and media figures began highlighting similar stories in their communities. The conversation around homelessness began to shift, focusing more on prevention and understanding the complex paths that lead people to lose everything. 1 year later, Joe Rogan hosted a special episode reuniting Thomas and Maria. Thomas, now cleaned up and back in the classroom, had helped over 100 homeless individuals reconnect with educational opportunities. Maria, finishing her freshman year with honors, had started a student organization dedicated to combining education with community service. "You know what the craziest thing is?" Joe said during the reunion episode. "All of this started because a teenage girl wasn't afraid to sit down on the sidewalk and share her lunch. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness." The story of Joe Rogan, Maria Rodriguez, and Thomas Wheeler became more than just a viral moment or a successful charity drive. It became a reminder that everyone has value, that circumstances don't define worth, and that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stop and see the human being behind the hardship. Isabella Rodriguez, Maria's mother, had expanded her role too. Her restaurant now partnered with the Street Scholars Program, providing meals for classes and job training opportunities for participants. The empanadas that had once been a simple act of sharing had become a symbol of community support and transformation. As the Second Chance Scholars Program expanded to other cities, Joe often reflected on that morning in Austin. He'd seen countless amazing things in his career, interviewed thousands of fascinating people, but watching a young girl share her lunch with a homeless man had taught him something new about human potential and the power of simple kindness. The program's success led to partnerships with major universities across the country, creating safety nets for educators and expanding resources for homeless education initiatives. What had started as a chance observation through a cafe window had grown into a movement that was literally saving lives and transforming communities. Thomas Wheeler now leads workshops for other educators about resilience and the importance of building support systems within academic communities. His story serves as both a warning about the fragility of financial security and an inspiration for how communities can come together to protect their own. His lectures, once again packed with eager listeners, now carry the added weight of lived experience. Literature, he often tells his students, isn't just about understanding words on a page. It's about understanding the human experience in all its complexity. His own story has become a powerful teaching tool, demonstrating how life can mirror art in unexpected ways. Maria Rodriguez, continuing her studies while working part-time at the foundation, has become an eloquent advocate for educational equity and community engagement. Her simple act of kindness, multiplied through Joe Rogan's platform and the generosity of thousands, continues to inspire others to look beyond appearances and reach out to those in need. The Foundation's work has highlighted a critical issue in American society: the vulnerability of educators and the gaps in our social safety net. More importantly, it's demonstrated how combining resources, Disability and compassion can create lasting change. Joe Rogan continues to use his platform to spotlight similar stories, always coming back to the core message. Real change happens when we see each other as human beings worthy of dignity and respect. The Foundation's success has inspired similar initiatives across different industries, creating a network of support for professionals who find themselves in crisis. The story that began with a shared sandwich has become a powerful reminder that sometimes the most meaningful changes start with the simplest actions. It's about more than charity or good publicity. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and understanding that any one of us could find ourselves in need of help. As Joe often says now when discussing the Foundation, we're all just one bad break away from needing help. The measure of a society isn't how it treats its most successful members, but how it protects those who've fallen on hard times. The ripple effects continue to spread, touching lives far beyond Austin, Texas. What started as a moment of connection between a student and a homeless professor has evolved into a movement that challenges how we think about education, healthcare, and community responsibility. And it all began because Joe Rogan happened to look out a cafe window at exactly the right moment, seeing not just a girl sharing her lunch, but the potential for transformation that exists in every act of kindness. His platform, influence, and genuine commitment to making a difference combined with Maria's compassion and Thomas's resilience to create something truly extraordinary. A reminder that when we stop to truly see each other, miraculous things can happen. The Second Chance Scholars Program has since evolved into something far more comprehensive than anyone initially imagined. Working closely with medical institutions across the country, they've established a network of healthcare providers willing to work with educators facing medical crises. This partnership ensures that no teacher has to choose between their health and their career. Jamie Vernon, Joe's producer who witnessed that fateful morning alongside him, has taken on a more active role in the Foundation. His expertise in media and communications has helped amplify these stories of transformation, creating documentaries that showcase the human side of educational excellence and the importance of protecting those who dedicate their lives to teaching others. The Foundation's reach extended beyond just helping teachers. They began identifying patterns in the stories they encountered, how often medical debt intersected with educational careers, how many talented educators were just one crisis away from losing everything. This data became the backbone of their advocacy work, informing policy discussions and leading to real changes in how educational institutions structure their healthcare benefits. Thomas Wheeler's Street Scholars Program has become a model for similar initiatives nationwide. His approach combines traditional academic subjects with practical life skills, creating a curriculum that addresses both immediate needs and long-term goals. Former students who've gotten back on their feet often return as mentors, creating a sustainable cycle of support and growth. What we're doing here isn't just teaching, Thomas often explains to visitors who come to observe the program. We're rebuilding dignity, one lesson at a time. His classes now include everything from literature analysis to financial literacy, with each subject carefully chosen to provide both practical knowledge and opportunities for personal growth. Maria's mother, Isabella, has expanded her involvement beyond providing meals. She's now teaching cooking classes as part of the Street Scholars Program, helping participants develop skills that could lead to employment in the restaurant industry. Her kitchen has become a place of learning and healing, where the simple act of preparing food together builds confidence and community. Food has always been my way of showing love, Isabella shares during one of the Foundation's documentary features. Now it's become a way to show people they can rebuild their lives. Her cooking classes have led to several program participants finding work in local restaurants, with some even starting their own catering businesses. Joe Rogan's regular podcast updates on the Foundation's work have inspired other media figures to examine similar issues in their communities. The conversation has expanded beyond just education and healthcare, touching on broader questions about community responsibility and social safety nets. His platform has become a powerful tool for highlighting both the challenges facing educators and the innovative solutions emerging across the country. The Foundation's work has also sparked important discussions within the academic community. Universities have begun re-examining their policies around medical leave and insurance coverage, with several institutions implementing new protections for faculty and staff. The Wheeler Protocol, as it's come to be known, provides comprehensive guidelines for supporting educators facing medical crises. Maria, now in her second year at UT Austin, has started a peer mentoring program that pairs college students with Street Scholars participants. This intergenerational exchange of knowledge and experience has created unexpected benefits for both groups. College students gain perspective and real-world understanding, while Street Scholars participants receive academic support and encouragement from peers who believe in their potential. When I first shared my lunch with Thomas, I had no idea I was part of something bigger. Maria reflects during a foundation event. I was just doing what felt right in the moment. Now I understand that those small acts of kindness can be the beginning of real change. The foundation's success has attracted attention from educational reformers and policymakers worldwide. Delegations from other countries have visited to study the Second Chance Scholars model, looking for ways to adapt its principles to their own educational systems. The program's emphasis on dignity and holistic support has resonated across cultural boundaries. Thomas's story has become required reading in several education policy courses, serving as a case study in both the vulnerabilities within the system and the potential for community-based solutions. His journey from tenured professor to homelessness and back to teaching has opened eyes to the precarious nature of academic careers and the importance of robust support systems. Joe Rogan's commitment to the cause has never wavered. He regularly features updates on the Foundation's work, but more importantly, he continues to use his platform to challenge assumptions about homelessness, education, and human potential. Every person has a story, he often reminds his listeners. Every person has value. Sometimes they just need someone to see it. The Foundation's work has expanded to include research initiatives, studying the intersection of education, healthcare, and economic stability. This research has led to the development of early intervention programs designed to identify and support educators at risk before they reach crisis points. Local communities have begun implementing their own versions of the Street Scholars program, adapting its principles to meet their specific needs. Some focus on technical education, others on arts and humanities, but all maintain the core principle of combining practical support with educational opportunity. The ripple effects continue to spread, touching lives in ways that couldn't have been predicted that morning in Austin. What started as a simple act of kindness, a shared lunch, a moment of connection, has grown into a movement that challenges how society thinks about education, community, and human dignity. Joe Rogan's decision to stop and notice that morning, to take action rather than simply observe, has created a legacy that extends far beyond podcast downloads or viewer numbers. It's a legacy measured in lives transformed, in communities strengthened, and in the growing recognition that sometimes the most powerful changes start with the simplest acts of human kindness. As the Foundation continues to grow and evolve, its impact reaches further than anyone could have imagined. But at its heart, it remains true to the spirit of that morning in Austin, the belief that every person deserves to be seen, that education can transform lives, and that sometimes all it takes to start a revolution is the willingness to share what you have with someone in need.